Good morning to you all. It's Thursday morning and welcome to Penn Vicarage. And thank you so much for joining us for our Bible reading talk for today. Friends, we are approaching Easter in Holy Week in our lives, so we're looking forward to that next week and so on. Do join us for worship. We're also approaching towards the death of Jesus in our morning talk for this morning. And today we're in Matthew chapter 26. We now have basically the preparation for and kind of the Last Supper, basically, according to Matthew. And it's a fascinating passage, so let's get stuck into it. It's Matthew 26. I'm starting to read at verse 4, beg your pardon, verse 17. Yeah, chapter 26, starting to read at verse 17. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus asking, "Where do you want us to make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He said to them, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12. While they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed and began to say to him one after another, "Surely not I, Lord." He answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." He replied, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." And he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, you'll never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they'd sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters because of me this night, for it's written, 'I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered.' But after I'm raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay. Right, so the context is it's now Thursday. It's the night before Jesus died, and it's the traditional Passover festival. And they used to get it ready on Thursday afternoon, and they celebrated together Thursday evening. And what basically they did, they sat down in family groups, and they shared this wonderful meal together. And it was a fascinating meal, and it went through the story of God delivering his people under Moses from slavery in Egypt. During the meal, they recited the Hillel, which is Psalms 113 through to 117 during the meal. And they drank various cups of wine and ate bread and various things. And during it, they recited the story. And in it, I think the youngest child or something asks the father of the house what it's about, and then the father tells the story of God delivering his people from Egypt. And that's what Jesus and his disciples, they sat down as basically a family group, and they shared the Passover together. I think you've also got to remember that it wasn't like Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, nothing like it at all. They didn't sit at one great rectangular table. They sat in a big U, three cushions. They lay on the ground, and the food was kind of in the middle. If the U is like that, it was kind of there somewhere. They put the food in the middle somewhere, and they ate of it like that, and that's kind of how they ate. So it was much more like you see in Roman things than it was than Leonardo. And that's what they did. They shared the Last Supper together. There are some fascinating, intriguing bits of this passage. One is how Jesus at the beginning tells them to go and find somebody who's they say, "Where's it going to happen?" And Jesus sends them into town. We don't know whether Jesus had pre-prepared somebody who was prepared a house, or whether it was a supernatural thing. We do not know. We don't know about that one. And the other huge controversy in this reading is when Jesus said, "This is my body and this is my blood." What does he mean by "this is"? And huge debates have been had over the years. And to be honest, the word is a very, very ambiguous one, and it could be taken in all sorts of ways. So I don't really want to get into that this morning. I don't think it's helpful. But I think there are some things that we can all get from this. So I think we can learn. It's a fascinating story, and do read it with your heart. Hear the betrayal of Judas as he walks out before they share the meal together. and so on. And imagine the sense of disappointment of the disciples and where that's going on, and so on. So try and get that. But there are a few, as I say, a few things that we can learn from this. Firstly, Jesus talks about, this is my blood of the new covenant. A covenant is like an agreement. And in the Old Testament, God made a covenant through Moses with his people. He looked after them, they kept his law. That was kind of the covenant. And then in Jeremiah talks about a new covenant. And that's what Jesus is referring to here. So Jeremiah chapter 31, starting verse 31 says, "The days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, a covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, says the Lord. But this is the new covenant, this is the covenant I'll make with the house of Israel, says the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No longer shall they teach one another, or say to each other, know the Lord. For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, says the Lord. For I'll forgive their iniquity, and remember their sin no more." So this is my blood of the new covenant for the forgiveness of sins. So that's the new covenant he's talking about. The reference for that is Jeremiah chapter 31. Jeremiah 31, 31 to 34. So that's what he's talking about when he talks about the new covenant in his blood for the forgiveness of sins. A new covenant. Jeremiah 31, 31 to 34. Second thing you can see from this is that this wonderful Passover meal that Jesus had with his disciples looks kind of back and present and future. So, in the Passover, they were celebrating the fact that God had rescued his people from slavery in Egypt. Thus, Jesus is celebrating in his life, celebration that he would give us from sin. His blood was going to free us from the forgiveness, from the slavery of sin. Today, when we share the Eucharist together, we share again in what Jesus has won for us in our time now. But he also talks about, I will never do it again with you until anew in the kingdom of heaven, looking forward to the future as well. So you can see in this fantastic feast, which we are invited to share in whenever we have the Holy Communion together, we are looking back at Moses and deliverance from slavery. We're looking at Jesus' death on the cross. Then we're celebrating it now, and we're celebrating it in anticipation of the future as well. So as you can see, it goes back to Jesus, it goes now, and it goes in the future. So it was and is and evermore shall be. So in this fantastic feast, we are looking back and we're looking forward. Okay, so two things we've got so far. Firstly, the new covenant, which Jesus brings us, referring to that new covenant in Jeremiah for the forgiveness of sins and knowing God and so on. And also this feast, for the Eucharist, communion, call it what you like, looks back to Moses, to Jesus, is present now, and for the future as well. So it looks back, present, and future. I think that's fantastic. Finally, what are we principally celebrating here? We are celebrating remembering the death of Jesus, his body which is broken for us, and his blood which is shed for us. And it's forgiveness of sins and so on. But in the same way that the bread is broken at the feast, this is my body, he says, my body broken, my body given for you, and this is my blood which is shed for you. And we are remembering principally his death, what he did for you and for me, remembering what it cost him and what it achieved, that he loved you and I so much that he gave his life for you and for me. And he wasn't just a human being, he was God, God in human form. And that God loved the world so much that he did this for you and for me. It was the ultimate act of love, that he gave his life. His body was broken for us, and his blood was shed for us. And that's what we're remembering at communion. So, in this fascinating passage with lots of discussion points about what that man was doing in, how they found the right person for the feast, discussion points about what is meant by this is my body and this is my blood. The church have argued about that one for year after year after year. And this fascinating feast, which is so misunderstood because it really wasn't like Da Vinci's picture of the Last Supper. It was all it was, B3 in a big U on the floor and so on, with all the high emotion of the departure of the betrayer Judas, so much that we can gain. Firstly, what is meant by the new covenant, for the forgiveness of sins, in time which we'll all know God. Jeremiah 31 to 34. The fact this fantastic feast looks back to Moses' deliverance, to Jesus' deliverance from sin. We celebrate it now, and we look forward to the kingdom of heaven in the future. But finally, that his body was broken for us, and his blood was shed for us. We remember at this time what it achieved, but also what it cost him. And with his love in our hearts and minds today, I wish you a good day, and God bless you, and more tomorrow. Bless you. Thanks.